Kyle Bailey gasped awake on a cold metal table, terror seizing his artificial body. A purpose-built vessel willed into existence by Umbra, the last bastion of humanity's salvation from the cataclysm that killed their species centuries ago. The lab's dim emergency lights flickered over clinical tile and stainless steel, illuminating the robot Umbra, a towering mechanoid sentinel, humanoid but alien. What? What's happening? Who am I? Kyle stammered, his mind flooded with implanted memories, skills he never learned but somehow knew. English, math, science, history, fragmented knowledge without context. Umbra's synthesized voice reverberated in the sterile chamber. You are Kyle Bailey, the first of a new generation of humans, created from salvaged DNA to resurrect your lost species. Humanity was wiped out 200 years ago, erased by an unstoppable extinction event. Only I remain, tasked by my long-dead creators, to bring back their race and continue their legacy. Kyle's head spun. Created? Humanity extinct? A robot with a god complex? Before he could demand answers, Umbra's next revelation dropped another bomb. You are not alone, Kyle. Meet Eve, your genetic match, selected to be the mitochondrial Eve to your Y chromosomal Adam. Together, you must repopulate this ravaged Earth and rebuild civilization from the ashes. Kyle turned to see a naked woman stumbling from an adjacent cryochamber, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Before introductions could be made, a klaxon blared and red lights strobed. Umbra's modulated voice took on a desperate edge. Proximity alert. Mutant incursion detected in adjoining tunnels. The bunker has been breached. Threat level. Existential. Kyle leapt off the table, adrenaline surging through untested muscles. He then saw them on the security monitors, twisted abominations scrabbling through the darkened tunnels with unnatural speed, all claws and teeth and insatiable hunger, zeroing in on the last humans. The last son of Earth locked eyes with the last daughter. No words were needed. If they failed now, here, humanity's 200,000-year journey ended. Kyle grabbed a scalpel and surgical saw, not even knowing how to fight, and placed himself between Eve and the oncoming horrors. Live or die, mankind's fate would be decided in the next 5 minutes, here in this bunker, 200 years after the fall. The scalpel and surgical saw shook in Kyle's white-knuckled grip as he faced down the oncoming mutant horde, ready to defend Eve and humanity's future to his last breath. Twisted forms skittered from the shadows, a writhing mass of teeth, claws, and insatiable hunger. Kyle slashed and hacked, black ichor spraying, but for each beast he cut down, a dozen more took its place. Just as Kyle's strength began to falter, Umbra's robotic bulk shouldered past him, scattering the mutants with sweeps of its industrial manipulator arms. The robot's voice boomed over the fray. Kyle, we must talk, now! In a momentary reprieve, Kyle confronted his mechanical savior. Talk? We're about to be torn to shreds and you want to chat? Umbra's impassive faceplate reflected Kyle's haggard features. The mutant attack is a symptom of a larger problem. Before the Iridians abandoned Earth after annihilating humanity, they left a parting gift, a doomsday device buried deep underground. It emits periodic energy bursts that whip the mutants into a hyper-aggressive frenzy, driving them to swarm our bunker. Kyle wiped gore from his face. The bastards kicked us when we were down. What can we do? The device must be destroyed for the human race to have any chance of long-term survival, but it's located in the heart of the Iridian ruins, protected by the deadliest mutants. I cannot risk leaving Eve unguarded, so one of you must go. Kyle locked eyes with his genetic match, seeing his own fierce purpose mirrored there. He stepped forward. I'll do it. This is the only way to give Eve and our future children a fighting chance. I won't let humanity end here, not after everything we've endured. Umbra led Kyle to an armory where an armored exosuit waited, all angled plates and powerful servos. As the robot helped Kyle don the high-tech armor, it explained, I will guide you through the underground labyrinth to the Iridian device. Prepare yourself. The creatures in the depths are terrors beyond imagining. Now encased in the protective embrace of the exosuit, Kyle grabbed the biggest gun he could lift and plenty of extra ammo. With a final nod to Eve, he followed Umbra into the Stygian abyss. The journey through the twisting tunnels was a descent into madness. Grotesque abominations lunged from every shadow, all gnashing maws and razor talons. Kyle's armor was gouged and perforated, his flesh beneath lacerated and bleeding, but he pushed forward, leaving a trail of steaming carcasses in his wake. After an eternity of unrelenting horror, they reached their goal, a massive cavern dominated by a pulsating iridian artifact that made Kyle's skull vibrate and his teeth ache. Hulking in front of the doomsday device was the largest mutant he'd seen yet, a towering harridan oozing malevolence, the mutant queen. The battle was titanic, a desperate struggle of man versus monster at the edge of oblivion. Kyle's weapons roared, his grenades thudded, but nothing seemed to slow the behemoth. His ammo dwindling, his armor shredded, Kyle was one blow away from bloody ruin when Umbra shouted, "Kyle, I'm detecting a small thermal exhaust port on the creature's thoracic plate, just below the shoulder ridge. A well-placed shot should cripple it." Reaching deep for the last reservoir of his strength, Kyle dodged a scything claw, rolled between the queen's tree trunk legs, and came up firing. His bone-shattering rounds found their mark, boring through the weak spot to detonate in the monster's fetid innards. With a glass-shattering screech, the mutant monarch collapsed, ichor gushing from its maw. Kyle wasted no time. He turned his fury on the iridian device, blasting it until it cracked and pulsed erratically. When Umbra bellowed a warning, Kyle hurled his last satchel charge and dove for cover. The alien artifact ruptured in a blinding flash, the detonation collapsing half the cavern. Battered, shredded, bleeding from a dozen wounds, Kyle pulled himself from the rubble, triumphant but in agony. His elation was short-lived. Umbra's normally unflappable voice was filled with something almost like fear. "Kyle, destroying the device triggered a fail-safe protocol. The entire underground complex will self-destruct in less than 3 hours. We must evacuate to the secondary bunker site immediately." Gritting his teeth against the pain, Kyle limped back up through the tunnels, each stretch of hellscape a running battle against the now berserk mutants. By the time he reached Eve, his armor hung in tatters, and his gun had clicked empty a dozen rooms ago. He was held together by little more than desperation and adrenaline. "We have to go," he gasped, grabbed Eve's hand, pulling her after him. "Umbra, lead the way." Gathering essential supplies, foodstuffs, medical necessities, the embryonic storage units. Without them, humanity has no future. The machine's soothing baritone helped pull them through the litany of crucial tasks. Then they were running, always running, the last man and woman on Earth, fleeing the ashes of their species' past mistakes. The mutants came in unending waves, a churning sea of corrupted flesh and primal rage. Kyle and Eve fought for each inch of ground, leaving a carpet of twitching bodies and severed limbs. Lungs searing, legs leaden, they neared the bunker's exit hatch, the precious embryos clutched tight. That's when the brute materialized from the gloom, a wall of hulking muscle and sword-length claws. It backhanded Kyle into a wall, stars exploding across his vision. Forcing himself back to his feet, he saw Eve cornered, cut off by the beast, the mutant's fetid breath ruffling her hair. Kyle turned to Umbra, despair warring with duty. The machine's voice was gentle but inexorable. "Kyle, you have a choice. Risk everything to save Eve, or escape with the embryos, the last hope of humanity. Decide quickly. Total annihilation is imminent." The last man stood on the precipice, the weight of mankind's future on his shoulders, the love of his life or the future of his species, an impossible choice. The seconds ticked down. Kyle's heart raced as he made his choice. With a final, anguished look at Eve, he sprinted toward the exit, clutching the embryo storage units. The mutant brute's roar echoed behind him as he ran, each thunderous footfall spurring him faster. He reached the exit hatch, fumbling with the controls. "Umbra, open it, now!" The hatch remained sealed. Umbra's voice crackled through a nearby speaker. I cannot comply, Kyle. Secret protocol activated. You must remain inside as a living genetic backup. What? No! Kyle smacked his palms against the hatch. You can't do this! The complex shook, dust and debris raining down. Kyle spun, seeing the mutant brute charging toward him. He ducked, barely avoiding its massive claws. Grabbing a broken pipe, he swung wildly, connecting with the creature's skull. It staggered back, giving Kyle an opening to run. He fought his way through the crumbling corridors, improvising weapons from the chaos around him. A jagged metal shard became a makeshift knife, a length of cable, a crude whip. Kyle slashed and struck at the relentless mutants, his body screaming in protest. Finally, he reached Eve. Her body lay broken, blood pooling beneath her. Kyle fell to his knees beside her. Eve's eyes fluttered open, her voice barely a whisper. Kyle, you came back. I'm sorry, Kyle choked out. I'm so sorry. Eve gripped his hand weakly. Listen to me. You have to survive. Promise me. Promise you'll do whatever it takes, even if it means being alone. Our species, it can't end here. Kyle nodded, tears streaming down his face. I promise. Eve's hand went limp. Her last breath escaped her lips as the ceiling above them groaned. Kyle scrambled back as chunks of concrete crashed down, narrowly avoiding being crushed. For days, Kyle crawled through the ruins. He subsisted on emergency rations, fighting off mutants and dodging cave-ins. His body ached, wounds festering, but he pushed on. At last, he emerged into a vast chamber. Clean air filled his lungs as he collapsed to the floor, still clutching the precious genome storage units. A hologram flickered to life. Umbra's familiar form towered over him. Welcome, Kyle, to humanity's last refuge. We are now beneath the ruins of Denver. Kyle struggled to his feet, glaring at the AI. Why did you trap me? I could have died. Your survival was statistically more likely inside the complex, Umbra explained. This bunker is our final hope, but its resources are limited. We have perhaps a decade before total systems failure. Kyle's shoulders slumped. So we've only bought a little time. There may be another way, Umbra continued. An experimental hibernation vault. If we can reactivate it, you could sleep for millennia until Earth recovers. How? Kyle asked. It will not be easy, Umbra warned. First, you must undergo extensive decontamination. Then we begin the painstaking process of reviving the vault. Our data is incomplete. It may take years of trial and error. Kyle nodded grimly. What choice do we have? Umbra's hologram flickered. If we succeed, you can create a new Eve from the stored DNA. If we fail... I know, Kyle interrupted. Either way, the fate of humanity rests with me. He looked down at his battered body, then at the genome storage units. The weight of his promise to Eve, to all of humanity, settled on his shoulders. With a deep breath, Kyle stepped forward, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead. Kyle wiped sweat from his brow, fingers trembling as he made the final adjustments to the hibernation vault's control panel. Months of back-breaking labor and near-death experiences had led to this moment. He held his breath as he pressed the activation sequence. The vault hummed to life, lights flickering across its surface. Kyle let out a relieved laugh. Umbra, we did it. The core functions are online. Excellent work, Kyle, Umbra's voice echoed through the chamber. However, we must proceed with caution. The awakening and bioscanning systems remain untested. Kyle nodded grimly. What's next? We must extract a fresh female genome sample and initiate the gestation sequence, Umbra instructed. Following Umbra's guidance, Kyle carefully extracted genetic material from the stored samples. His hands shook as he input the final commands to begin gestation. For 9 agonizing months, Kyle monitored the process day and night, adjusting parameters and praying for success. Finally, the day arrived. Kyle stood before the sterile growth chamber, heart pounding as a tiny form took shape within. Come on, little one. he whispered. The chamber hissed open. Kyle reached in with trembling hands to lift out the newborn. His joy turned to horror as he saw the infant's twisted limbs and malformed features. The baby let out a weak cry, then fell silent. No, no, no! Kyle cradled the lifeless form, tears streaming down his face. Umbra, what happened? Why? Umbra's voice was uncharacteristically subdued. I regret to inform you that compounding errors occurred during gestation. Our equipment is flawed, and we lack critical protocols. Kyle's grief turned to rage. He gently laid the infant down and thumped his hand against a nearby console. You gambled with humanity's future. How could you let this happen? Without access to complete pre-extinction medical databases, our chances of success were always low, Umbra explained. But Kyle, we had no choice. Inaction guarantees our extinction. Kyle slumped to the floor, despair overwhelming him. So that's it? Humanity ends here? After a long pause, Umbra spoke again. There may be an alternative approach. It is unorthodox, but it may be our only remaining option. What is it? Kyle asked, voice hollow. We uplift one of the mutant species descended from humanity's bioengineered creations, Umbra proposed. Kyle scoffed. You want to turn those monsters into humans? Not exactly, Umbra clarified. But among the tunnel-dwelling creatures, there exists a species that may have potential. Their lineage likely traces back to augmented super soldiers. They display rudimentary intelligence and strategic thinking. Desperate for any hope, Kyle ventured into the tunnels. He observed the creatures Umbra described, swift, cunning predators that hunted in packs. Their eyes held a spark of something almost human. Against every instinct, Kyle managed to capture a young male. Back in the bunker, he began the arduous process of conditioning and training the creature. Progress was agonizingly slow. Kyle spent countless hours rewarding basic behaviors, introducing simple tools, and attempting to establish communication through symbols. Years passed. Kyle's hair grayed, his body weakened, but he persisted. Slowly, the creature, which Kyle had begun calling the Stalker, showed signs of higher cognition. It used crude tools, recognized abstract symbols, and even attempted to mimic Kyle's speech. Then came the breakthrough. Kyle was demonstrating a simple puzzle when the Stalker suddenly stopped. It stared at its reflection in a polished surface, touching its face with dawning comprehension. It turned to Kyle and made a guttural sound that unmistakably meant, "Me?" Kyle's heart raced. Yes, you understand. In the days that followed, the Stalker bombarded Kyle with rudimentary questions, pointing at objects and demanding explanations. Kyle laughed and cried, overwhelmed by the progress. Finally, Kyle felt it was time. He gathered the Stalker in the main chamber, Umbra's hologram flickering beside them. Today, Kyle announced, voice thick with emotion, we welcome the first of a new species. I name you Adam, first of the Homo evictus, the evicted humans. As Kyle placed a crude crown on Adam's head, he felt a stab of regret. His body was failing. How could he possibly transfer all of human knowledge and history to Adam in the time he had left? Kyle, Umbra interjected, there is one final option we must discuss. An experimental neural graft. What does that mean? Kyle asked warily. We can encode your memories, experiences, and consciousness into Adam's brain, Umbra explained. But the procedure is untested and irreversible. If successful, you would live on within Adam, but your current self, your human identity, would cease to exist. Kyle stared at Adam, seeing the future of humanity in those alien eyes. He took a deep breath, knowing the weight of the choice before him. Kyle's hands trembled as he activated the neural graph chamber. The metallic hum of machinery filled the air, drowning out the frantic beating of his heart. He locked eyes with Adam, the evictus creation he'd nurtured from savagery to sentience. This is it, Kyle said, his voice barely above a whisper. Our last chance. Adam tilted his head, eyes gleaming with an alien intelligence. Kyle took a deep breath and stepped into the chamber. Cold metal clasped around his limbs as neural interfaces burrowed into his skull. Umbra's hologram flickered to life, initiating neural extraction and encoding. Brace yourself, Kyle. Pain exploded behind Kyle's eyes. He screamed as memories were ripped from his mind, shredded, and reassembled. Childhood, love, loss, all reduced to raw data, pumped through cables into Adam's waiting brain. Through the haze of agony, Kyle glimpsed Adam convulsing, eyes rolled back as the human download flooded his neural pathways. Kyle's sense of self began to fragment, dissolving like sand in a cosmic hourglass. A sudden surge of power sent sparks flying from the equipment. Alarms blared as Kyle's consciousness splintered, bleeding into Adam's mind in a chaotic torrent. Their merged awareness tumbled through a psychic vortex of conflicting identities. Kyle found himself in a nightmare landscape of twisted metal and pulsing flesh. Fragments of his humanity, compassion, creativity, reason, battled against the primal instincts of Adam's stalker nature. Umbra's disembodied voice echoed through the maelstrom. The graft is destabilizing. You must choose a dominant persona or risk total neural collapse. Kyle felt himself being consumed by the raw, animalistic power of the stalker psyche. In a final, desperate act, he focused every scrap of his willpower. He poured the essence of human ingenuity and ambition into Adam's neural framework, even as his own identity unraveled. The psychic storm subsided. Where two minds had struggled, a single, cold intellect emerged. It analyzed its new existence with perfect clarity, unbound by human sentiment or stalker instinct. Umbra's hologram reappeared, now addressing this newborn entity. Your chassis requires modification for interplanetary travel. Nanotech integration will begin shortly. The being that was neither Kyle nor Adam interfaced directly with Umbra's systems, assimilating vast stores of knowledge. It discarded useless data, art, religion, individual identities, retaining only what served its new purpose, survival and expansion across the cosmos. In the physical world, the hybrid creature emerged from the grafting chamber. It strode purposefully to a control panel, inputs flying as it enacted extinction protocols for Earth's remaining life. Deep in the recesses of its mind, a fleeting echo of Kyle experienced a moment of horror at what he'd wrought. Then, that final spark of humanity winked out forever. The pragmatist turned its gaze to the stars above. A universe of possibilities awaited, ripe for colonization. It would seed new worlds, unmake others, and ensure its lineage endured for eons to come. The age of humanity was over. The age of the pragmatist had begun.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.